Welcome, everybody, to the Counter Clipping Show for December 12th, 13th. It's the 13th, 2021. We are almost done with 2021. Hopefully, everybody is having a good holiday prep. Tonight, we are finishing, in fact, this pour will be finishing the Ardbeg Wee Beastie, which I probably won't buy again, not because I hate it, but because I'd rather try something different, and I don't love it, right? I don't like, wow, we're gonna have more of that. There's plenty of examples of that in the local liquor store. Once we finish that, which, like I said, we'll be at the end of this particular glass, we'll be switching to the bolder This is Boulder Spirits from Colorado. Thank you, Dave, for this bottle. This is a peated malt. It's not particularly heavily peated, but it's an American peated single malt whiskey. And I've had it. It's pretty good. As an experiment, I bought a bottle of port. It was about $25, and I tasted it, and I hate it. So we won't be drinking any port on the Counterclipping show. It had been my plan to clip Panzer's Last Stand right there for this show, and that didn't happen because I finished clipping it like yesterday. So it's done. So we're back to Croix de Guerre, where I have no less than two full, well, not full anymore, but two sheets remaining here that are going in this particular counter tray. And thanks to John, I now have a copy of Forgotten War, so I have even more backup of ASL counters. I'd like to direct everybody's attention to the notes in the video description, which include our channel of the week, which is Tabletop Templar. It is a new channel. So check him out. He has done a couple of interesting things. Give him a subscription and some likes and some comments and all that stuff. I would also like to point out in the video description is linked it's from the Armchair Dragoons, but it is a consolidated Wargaming events calendar, which, may still need a little bit of revision, but is, I think, capturing every significant Wargaming event that is happening in the U.S. at least, and a few events outside. So check that out. Again, it is linked in the video description. I will also remind folks, if you are not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe to the channel. Please do thumbs up the video. Just being here supports the channel, and I really appreciate it. If you want to do more than that, there are links in the video description to the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, and the merch store. With all that out of the way, did I have anything else I wanted to open with? I don't think so. Although I will be touching on the subject of events again at some point tonight, because we're going to talk about what events, because my calendar for 2022 has begun to firm up, so we're going to talk about that. So, first of all, let's say hello to Vince Reed, John Keyports, Six Actual, Charles Latorre, John Longshore, Kyle Reese, Manders, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Daniel Silverthorne, Ken X, Alan Salazar, Matt Taylor, Mike Anthony, Jeff Beeler, don't think I got you yet, James Whitmer, Mark McNair from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, wrong side of town, but I'm from up there as well. Fast Hines from Toronto, Ontario, Brant from the hellish third world country, that is the Carolinas, Brian, BC Games, Ye Old Geezer Gamer, Shane Logan, William Aarons, John Sy from the sunny Philippines, Lind Pratt from Hilliard, Ohio, Dan Slimak, Henry Sikorsky, Daniel Berger from North Carolina, Dale Brady from the equally hellish Michigan, Paul O'Farrell from Phoenix, and Jeff Anderson. And let's extend we got more. Hold on a second. Kilroy is here. Richard Hegman, John Clark, David Imperato, Iggy Crichtal, Fucko is in the house, Michael Potts, Kevin Roach. Welcome to the Counterclipping stream. Glad to have you here from Canada. Tim Zales, Brian Gash, Half-Ass Gaming, Robert Haight, Scott Bell. He told me how to pronounce that, and I forget, but I remember as I'm saying it. So I'll try to correct myself. Findle70, Chad Canady, and Bill Simone. If I haven't mentioned anybody, I apologize. We'll try and catch everybody here. We are at the very generous number of 87 right now. We've set so last week would have been a record had it not been for the previous week. Thank you for stopping by. Thanks to everybody who stops by every week. So, it's pretty good, but like I said, I'm not in love with it. It's very young and a little bit rough, and you got to put quite a bit of water into it. Sean Torno, welcome to the stream. We had really high winds over the weekend. Today, not so much. And actually yesterday, not so much. But on Saturday, we had pretty high winds. Actually, yesterday we had some pretty high winds too. And the temperature dropped we went out to deliver Christmas gifts, and it took way longer than it was supposed to because of traffic stupidity, and B, there was it was still really gusty. So So what has arrived this week? There's still at least one or two things en route. I did score a copy of something that I'll hopefully have it next week to show off. In the meantime, this Thursday's unboxing, if I get the videos edited, there will be more, but at minimum, there will be a Thursday unboxing at 10 a.m., which will be SCS North Africa. So stay tuned for that. Arrivals this week. So I hit on a Pay It Forward on one of the Pay It Forward Facebook groups, okay? So both of these things have kind of been on my radar for a while. One is Winter War, Europa, Winter War. This is the Russo-Finnish War. And another one was like a curiosity. This East Front Battles one. This is Vance von Borries' design. This is kind of a predecessor to the East Front series. It's not exactly a classic. And, you know, really, I asked this question of the chat. Are we aware of any classics that came out of 3W? Because I can't think of anything. I would love to be able to say that there are many deserving and underappreciated titles from 3W, but I can't think of any. I did pick up Spires of the Kremlin, which is Volume 2 in that series, but that's actually by Joe Youst rather than by Vance von Borries. So, same system. In neither case did I pay a giant pile of money for it, and this kind of was bundled with Winter War. Winter War is punched, but it's pretty well taken care of, and I have already done a basic count of the pieces, which says that it is complete. So I am happy. So it wasn't just a count. I counted it by counter color, but so our topic tonight is complexity and detail and their impact on playability and realism. Now, realism is kind of the bugbear word here, I think. So we're gonna talk about this in detail. So Marty Sample is here. Thank you for stopping by, Marty. 3W Classics. Yeah, I just can't. I can't think of anything. I'd like to say I've got about 4 or 5 3W games in my library. Not a lot. Yeah, 3M's a very different company. By the way, the 3M that used to produce the board games, that Avalon Hill bought their line of board games, which included Feudal and Acquire and a bunch of other stuff, that is in fact the same 3M that makes tape, and made tape back then. For some reason, they had decided to diversify into a line of board games. Now, that would be less... I mean, it would still be kind of ridiculous now, actually, but at the time, you know... Hey, they had some of those games. At least one of those games, Acquire, is a total classic. Yeah. So the Finnish trilogy, Marty mentions which is not by 3W, by the way. I forget who the publisher is on that. It is a 3-game series, each volume of which deals with a different phase of Russo-Finnish War in the context of the World War II era, and it goes for a giant pile of money. So, and I think probably so. And Barrett, I guess I'm going to talk about this too. But this is a good example. The game I'm about to mention is a good example of errant complexity and realism that's not realism. So, what do we mean when we say a game is realistic? I mean, what are the actual things? I mean, we don't want to... we might say something vague like, oh, well, it reflects the historical outcomes, blah, 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 blah. But what specifically, what features in that design are we calling realistic? Now, I'm not saying that's an invalid question, but I will say that everybody's probably going to, even if we're talking about the same game, everybody's probably going to have a different answer. And my notion of realism, and I'm going to show you actually, let me see if I can pull the quote up, because when I announced the topic for the week, I actually got a preliminary response, I got to find it, from our man in Amsterdam, Ted Racer, who will, let's pull it up here. So here's Ted's response. He won't be here, so sorry, Ted, you can't make it. Ted tends to watch these after the live broadcast, which is true of lots of folks. To him, the basic problem with this never-ending debate is the general conflation of detail with realism when the two are not the same. Some very detailed systems are less realistic than some quite abstract designs. And I agree with Ted as far as this statement goes. I won't argue with that. I think that detail and realism are two separate variables that should be measured separately. Now, there is some correlation between them in some designs. One game that John Sy hits the crux of the matter. Realism equals Chrome. I would argue that that's not necessarily. Not only is that not true, but that's the wrong way to approach the subject of realism. To me, I think that if we're talking about realism in war games, right, simulation games, we're going to use that term. At some point, we're going to have to have a show where we talk about what the hell we mean by simulation. But for tonight, let's just hand wave that. What is the designer attempting to simulate? And that's what we should be judging on whether it's realistic or not. Is that feature of the game reflective of the historical realities or situations or outcomes? I mean, outcomes is tricky because you don't actually want strictly historical outcomes, because then you're back to reading a book, right? You might as well read a book. So what if I want to have a let's say I want to simulate something straightforward and something that we all have a more or less uniform reference on. Let's say that I want to replicate that fight around Foy from Band of Brothers. It's a good bet that at least 75 of the people in the chat right now have seen that episode with Foy and Spears coming in and saving the day from what's his name. If we want to replicate that engagement at more or less that level, where it's more or less a company scale engagement, so you've got about 3 platoons or 9 squads or what have you, we're going to say, okay, what's the most detailed game that we can think of that would be fit at that scale, right? World War II, squad level or company level, maybe tactical. And the obvious answer is ASL, but how accurately is ASL going to reflect that beat for beat, right? I'm not sure that it is. But what it does do is represent things like command hesitation, right? You have the cower rolls, for example, for a squad that just chokes up on its fire, or when a leader breaks. And I don't remember the character's name, the individual's name who prepped his pants and had to get taken over from, but that's clearly a broken leader, right? So we might look at ASL, but there are other situations in which ASL is not particularly realistic, and I think doesn't give you particularly good outcome, or gives you outcomes that don't feel right. But one of the points of ASL that dates back to Squad Leader, that ASL was consciously attempting to reflect in its design, is the fact that sometimes your troops will break, right? Your troops will become unresponsive to orders, and the game system has to take over playing them. Either they don't do anything, or they will behave contrary to the way you want, as directed by the broken rules, for the broken movement rules, for example. So lots of good commentary. Now I would also say that something like, now look in contrast, let's take a game like Nevsky. Okay, what's Nevsky? I would argue that Nevsky is quite a realistic game in that area that Nevsky is trying to simulate, which is the kind of tempo of feudal medieval warfare where you have to levy troops, and you take them on campaign, and eventually you have to go home because you got to feed them, right? I think the realism and the detail's not particularly high, and this is it's an operational game, but I think the realism there is reasonably good, right? If what we mean is is it simulating is it answering the questions that the designer is trying to answer, right, in the design? And I think it is. And that is a more, I think, pertinent question than just saying, well, it's super detailed, so therefore it must be super realistic. There are also concessions in really complicated games. I mean, there are concessions in, well, I mean, in Europa. Okay, so we're still playing War in the Desert as our Tuesday game. We've resumed OCS, thank God. I am happy to report. But then, of course, we're playing next week, and we got to then, or this week, and then we got to all take off a couple of weeks for the holidays. Well, we can always, Jeffrey, we can always refer to primary sources or even subsequent analysis to have some idea of what's realistic or reasonable and what's not. So yes, Brant says, give everybody thumbs up the video. Where are we at here? I got to get back to... I somehow managed to lose the... No, I didn't. There it is. Cool. So we do have 115 people here, so that's pretty great. For Combat Commander is another one that I think that type of situation would work fairly well. It is the realism with Combat Commander, where you are for some period of time sitting there paralyzed and unable to do anything and have no agency. I think Combat Commander will be very suited for that. Jason W. mentions that this is why designer's notes are essential, and he's right. I'm a big proponent of reading the designer's notes carefully to judge, not only to judge designer intent, but to try to align the designer's intent up with my tastes. There are times when I download a rule book because I want to check a game out and read the designer's notes, and it's like bing, and a big light goes off, and I'm like, man, I got to get this game. That's happened. One example of that would be Last Chance for Victory. It was a game that I bought on the strength of the designer's notes and historical commentary. There's probably, I can't think of an example offhand, but there's probably an example of a game where I read I can think of a designer whose attitude as expressed in designer's notes in the past has led me to not purchase any of their games. Let me put it that way. And that's not to say that so-and-so, who I'm not going to name here tonight, is a bad designer as such, but it does mean that his design sense is not in alignment with my sense of being a wargame player. Jeff Beeler mentions that Foy is a popular Red Orchestra map. I have played a total of like less than an hour of Red Orchestra, unfortunately, mostly because I suck at shooters. Edward Prezzuti, first of all, thanks for the chat. Thanks for joining. He thinks the OCS games model battles, etc. very well. So, that's another question, right? So, I have talked elsewhere, and I'm going to, refer the question back to Europa, right? I have reflected elsewhere about my experience with Second Front, right? Which is the Europa game on the West Front of World War II in Europe, which we started anyway. You don't have to start it here. It starts in July of 1943 with the invasion of Sicily, if you want. Okay, and we that's where we started. So we played it for something like a year. Okay, so it was a long campaign. Very detailed naval rules, very detailed air system, and the air system is really it's really a lot, right? It's really tough to fight your way through that air system, turn after turn after turn after turn, over the course of what was probably 50 turns or something like that, 40 or 50 turns. What we got, it's super detailed, right? You've got all these super granular air units and all these battalions floating around. There's a sense in which, hey, this order of battle with all these battalions floating around reflects what was actually there. but it also very unreasonably, I think, gives you complete freedom in then trying to leverage all that trash into meaningful combat forces, right? You build your cores up using your core markers, maximizing your different attachments. It's way more flexibility than the historical, commanders on the ground would have had really at any level. It gives you so much, it absolutely buries you in detail. Now, is it realistic? At the end of that process, the same thing applies to War Between the States, by the way. At the end of all that, we got something that was historically believable, right? We had a, down to the wire German win on points because the Allies were not quite far enough into, it was pretty narrow too. The Allies were not quite far enough into Germany to score the points, and they lost quite a few points on botched amphibious invasions because we were screwing up those rules. Now, I'll also point out that, are we talking about friggin' Loverboy again? How are we doing that? Brant, I'm blaming Brant for this. There are mechanics which we're seeing quite a bit of now in the state that Wargaming is in, that allow you to sneak in detail without necessarily, I won't say they're not giving you complexity, but they're hiding the complexity from you. One of those mechanisms is the card-driven mechanic, the CDG mechanic, which gives you sort of this basic thing. In the traditional implementation, there are cards, the cards have events, and they have points, and you can use the event or the points, even just at that level, right? But you're building extra details in through the events, right? And maybe through the ways that you spend the points as well. So that's true. Jim is responsible for the mention of Loverboy. We had this conversation on Twitter today, and I'm appalled to be talking about Loverboy in the context of war, actually, in the context of a Wargaming relevant article. So Loverboy is a band that is worse than 38 Special on the basis of 38 Special had at least one decent song and Loverboy did not. The other terrible example I can think of would be, oh God, I forget who they were now. Night Ranger, also terrible. Zero good songs came out of Night Ranger. So at some point, and I think we're going to do this with Dan's stream, if we're going to talk about professional war games, then that is frankly not what this show is about, right? This show is about wargaming as a hobby and as a community, not wargaming as a professional discipline. That is a very different topic than I am going to try to address here myself. There is some effort at putting together a show on that topic, on professional versus hobby war games. But I need guests to talk about that. So we're working on that. I don't know if that'll be on this show or on the show with Dan, or whether that will be on a separate thing or not. I think the stream with Dan is on Dan's channel this week, I think. Supertramp, there you go. There's another good one. So, Loverboy. Oh my God. Anyway. No, I hate that song. That's like my least favorite. That's like the second worst song, second only to We Built This City on Rock and Roll. So Jeff, that's an interesting point too. And there's a lot of variables here. Does a basic fog of war rule, which is what Jeff's talking about with Victory in the West. So for those who don't know, Victory in the West is an old SPI system that exists still in a number of different incarnations, that many, but not necessarily all, the units on the map are untried, and you don't know their combat strengths until you actually fight with them, at which point you draw a random strength chit, which tells you their combat strength, and which is thereafter hidden under the unit, so the opponent does not necessarily know, A, what the strength is, or if they lose track of it, or B, whether the unit has taken step losses or not. just from looking at the stack. There's also, even the super basic, but I feel very effective OCS Fog of War rule, which basically just says you may not inspect the other player's stacks. They will have to put a attack-capable unit on top of the stack if there is one, but attack-capable combat unit. But I don't know that there's any non-combat units that are attack-capable. I don't think so, offhand. Even that helps to eliminate. I have to make a judgment call. I'm not counting factors, which is something we're absolutely doing in Europa. Well, I'll throw 2 more aircraft in here because then it'll be 5-1 instead of 4-1, and I can't get an exchange result on a 5-1 where I can on a 4-1 because I know I'm going to roll a 1. So, I mean, this is the conversation that we literally had last Tuesday. So, I'd say Nevsky is a game that features logistics. Logistics is kind of built into the model. I don't know that I'd call it a logistics game. If you want a logistics game that's like still kind of a war game, look at Supply Lines: The American Revolution from Hollenspiel. Very good model, a logistical model of the American Revolution. Well, We Built This City was done by Starship, not Jefferson Airplane. Jefferson Airplane was awesome. Starship sucked, even though it was most or all the same people. Edward Prezzuti mentions TCS, which, of course, that's true. And that was an attempt by Dean to sort of, bring that sort of op-sheet mechanic into wargaming where you'd have to create an objective. There are other implementations of that idea, including several of Dean's own that have been included in the Civil War Brigade series and the Regimental sub-series and now in Line of Battle, all of which are sort of similar. We've generally, we're not really a super focused topical show here. Let's not mistake us for that. Nevertheless, the Wednesday show is much more organized around random ranting about whatever topic we end up going off on. And the show topic of the week is really just a starter. And this is not an exceptionally focused show either, just so we know. So I think we are ready. I'm going to rinse this glass out first of all. Now, of course, in a juxtaposition to complexity, let's be correct about it and say complexity rather than detail, because as we've seen, you can add detail to a game without necessarily adding as much complexity as that level of detail might imply with things like cards or however else you want to do it. So juxtaposing complexity. Now, we should also, with the caveat that there's an idea that people don't like complex games, and there has never been a shred of evidence to support that assertion. And I would also cite considerable evidence to say that is not the case. Certainly there are challenges to getting people into complex games, right? I think we would all agree with that. But there are at least some complex games. All the really popular role-playing games, for example, ever have all been fairly to very complicated. And we see some of that in Wargames as well, in something like ASL, right? Which, while maybe not as complicated as people think it is nevertheless fairly complicated. I feel like there's like a double set of these and that these are in like a slightly different color, but it doesn't friggin' say. And everything else is exactly the same. I don't get it. All the factors are the same. Anyway. Yeah, see, okay, so another thing that we're kind of seeing with Europa is as we sort of slowly drift through the games, as I acquire them or as I do buddy unboxings or whatever, and this is something I talk about in one of the upcoming unsleeving things, which is the evolution of Europa as a game system as time went on, and you know, it definitely didn't change that much, but it changed more than you might think, right? There is you get as far as Second Front, or even, you know, War in the Desert / what we're playing right now is War in the Desert plus Baltic Front using Wavell's War. And there's the supply system is less abstract than you might think. There are supply points that are on the map that you have to truck around. You break them down into individual, I don't know what they're called, but we've been calling them tokens, where you break one supply point into 4 of these tokens that you can then use to feed units off the map. So it's less abstract than you might think, and it's another obvious place in which Europa becomes a clear predecessor to OCS. So when we talk about complexity versus playability, right? You know, we have to make there's going to be people that say, "Oh, nobody plays these super complicated games." Nobody plays. You know, how many times have we heard? Everybody in this chat, I'm guessing, has heard the statement of nobody can play campaign for North Africa because it's too complicated, or there's too much bookkeeping, or it's unplayable, or whatever. And yet there are people on YouTube right now doing playthroughs of Campaign for North Africa, right? Now, are they doing it all longhand like you would have done in 1981? I doubt it. I'm sure they're using a spreadsheet to do some of the logistic work. But still, you know, there is no built-in cap on playability based solely on a game being very complicated, right? And there are other very complicated games that are maybe not popular, and Goss is a good example, John Madison, that are maybe not super popular, but which are nevertheless played despite their complexity. And you know, I have to admire the heroic efforts of Goss fans, both of them, to fight their way through those previous exceptionally shitty rule books. The new rule book is much, much better. So yeah, but the Vichy French the trouble is they have the same statistics. And there's Free French too. I feel like there's like a fourth. So the set includes the 1940 French, the Vichy French, but the Vichy French have the German border color, and the Free French. That should be it, right? But I feel like there's an extra sheet here. Then that there's just a lot, and there's not. These are the right sheets, right? This is sheet 1, and this is sheet 2. It just feels like there's a lot of squads, like a lot of squads. Doug says there's no sane people playing Campaign for North Africa, and he might be true. He might be right about that. Another thing that keeps coming up, somebody's selling right now on where is it? Facebook. With Facebook Concept Marketplace, somebody's trying to sell a Decision War of the Pacific. And that's a perfect example of the Free French are in blue now. They should have been before. But they have a Cross of Lorraine on the counter, so you could tell the Free French apart. These two sets, it just seems like they're the same, and the factors are all the same. So I'm not sure what's up with that. Mike Anthony says if there's a dozen people in the world playing a game, does that mean the game truly gets played? For practical sound conversation, it does not. I think you're wrong. I think that as long as now, if it's one person solo, then maybe, or several people solo, then I think the answer is maybe not. But if there's even one group playing it, like occasionally, then I think that counts. I reject the idea that a game must be popular to have value. Stigler mentions Fighting Wings, which he says might be the most complicated game today. That's the Clash of Arms Fighting Wings, I take it. War in Europe is off the hook. There's so many problems in War in Europe, to be honest. And I mean, I say that with love, but there's a lot of problems in War in Europe. Yeah, these are not the Donat sheets either. I've got those separated out as well. Now Fucko is right. There's a whole separate counter mix for Donat, but that's not what these are. Greg Grant says that if a designer wants to up the realism factor, they need to focus on a specific function or specific aspect and try to make that aspect as real as possible, but don't try to boil the ocean. And that's I think that's exactly right. I think that I mean, I'm going to say that sort of kitchen sink designs are the kinds of games that I tend to like. But we had the colonoscopy conversation with Dan on Wednesday. If you want to talk about that, tune in on Wednesday on Dan's channel. So, I mean, I think you need to... okay, so... The old Geezer Gamer says that some people still play 1914. I'll be honest... There are people who will play a game strictly out of its curiosity factor as a historical artifact. There are people that do that, and frankly, I suspect that many of the people playing things like, Gettysburg 58. Are people still playing that? Sure. Avalon Hill, Stalingrad. Are people still playing that? Sure. I think that's a historical curiosity rather than... Now, I mean, does that mean that, that doesn't count as play? No, of course it does. But I don't think those games are worth anybody's time these days, to be honest about it. Even Panzer Blitz, I think, I'd be curious to try Panzer Blitz just to say, hey, yes, I have finally played Panzer Blitz, because I never have. I'm not under any illusions that I will get super into Panzer Blitz. That's not going to happen. So, Doug, I think I agree with you on that statement, but I'm not sure that I agree with your presentation. Doug says that if a design is elegant, you could have a lot of rules without much perception of complexity. The rules just make sense and are easy to learn. I mean, I think if a design is elegant, then a lot of the complexity is subsumed into the design and is invisible complexity. I would put it that way. Turning Point Stalingrad is a completely different story. That is not the game I'm talking about. I think Turning Point Stalingrad, and in fact all the Avalon Hill area Impulse games, are worthwhile. And I say that as somebody that hasn't played any of them. But, I talk to people too. And I believe those games have something to offer. The Avalon Hill Stalingrad, I don't really. I think one of the few of those games that does still carry its own weight as a game is Russian campaign. And that's why we have, 75 different versions of Russian campaign coming out in the next year, and the one version of Panzerblitz that's in the pipeline has struggled for years to get finished. So, all right, how are we doing this? It's got this enormous quantity of French squads. Not the Avalon Hill one. The Avalon Hill Turning Point Stalingrad did not come with the expansion. The expansion came out later, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken. Louis Goldberg, thanks for stopping. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. 125 people, by the way, which is outstanding. Our numbers are really, really high. John Longshore has spoken highly to me of Heart of Darkness, which is a recent release from Legion Wargames. It's kind of a new take, but a completely different design from the old Source of the Nile, which is a game that I think is a lot of fun. Now, I picked up, in the spirit of having a Russian campaign, I picked up the Compass Games Russia Besieged. And I believe I'm pretty well covered in that space at this point. I shake the counter tray so that the counters will settle a little bit in the compartment. In this particular trays, these are the Container Store plastic trays. There's really no counter drift, but the compartments aren't necessarily perfectly sized for the counters either. So it helps to shake them to sort of settle them down a little bit so that you can fit more counters in each compartment. Doug just said the same thing. So I was supposed to get an alert when somebody subscribed, and I didn't get an alert. So that's disappointing. But thank you. Daniel Berger, I think you're right about that. Dan, he says that sometimes when people say they want realism, what they really mean is that they want flavor and or something they're used to from other games. That's probably that latter part is probably true as well. People whose previous experience with whatever has set their expectations for whatever kind of games we're talking about. They don't have to be war games in that case. No, this is we're now into the Wee Beastie's gone. I just finished it. We're now into the Boulder Peated, which is much, much more subtle than Ardbeg anything really. So Jed, let me talk a little bit about that. So some of you might know from previous talk that I've been a contract worker for about 7 or 8 months now. And so, of course, contract's about up, ends at the end of December. You're always in that situation thinking, hey, am I going to be employed on January 1st? I don't know. I've been in that situation when I worked for, this is long enough ago that I'll name the company. I used to work for Delphi Automotive. So, yeah, I mean, those of us who've been around a while will recall the decades-long saga of Delphi and various bankruptcy proceedings. And this was at that time. Whoops, we're messing these up. So, I was under contract with them, and it was supposed to be a 90-day contract, and I ended up being there almost 3 years. And, they kept giving me these 60 and 30-day extensions. So it'd be like, okay, great. They're going to keep me, and I like working here, but I don't know if I'll be still employed on next month this time, right? And it would be like the 2 days before the contract was up that they would make that decision. And of course, eventually the decision came as we've already let all the full-time employees go. We can't keep you, sorry. So I outlasted several waves of layoffs of actual Delphi employees because I was that valuable, but I still didn't want to be in that situation. But you're in that situation. There are trade-offs to that situation, okay? It depends on what you're doing, of course, but it can work out that kind of contract worker is paid more than somebody doing essentially the same thing who happens to be a full-time employee. And that was the case for me at Delphi, and it's been the case here too. So I'm happy to report that as of literally today, I have signed an offer letter with the people I'm actually working for, not the company whose name is on my paychecks right now, to start with them as a permanent hire on January 3rd. So what does this mean for you, the channel audience? Well, it means that I now have the security to start thinking about event calendars for 2022. So that means that Winter Offensive is not going to happen because I'm committed to the Armchair Dragoons digital convention on that same weekend. We may have a different decision next year. We'll see. But it's like inside 30 days, and I shouldn't really be taken off in the first 30 days. So it's great news for the holidays. So, and there's a raise. It's not, it's how much of a raise is it? It's about 8% raise too, actually. So, plus time off and all that stuff. So it does mean Winterfest was happening one way or the other, right? Even if I was unemployed, I was still going to go to Winterfest because I could stay with my mom and she could pack lunches for me. That has happened in the past, and it's damned awkward. But I'd rather do that than miss Winterfest. So Winterfest is happening. Next event after that is Buckeye Games Fest. Now the Buckeye Game Fest. Is it April 4th? Don't quote me on the number. We're going to be talking about this more and more as the event approaches and as we figure out what we are actually doing at Buckeye Game Fest. So we are going to do some kind of big war game. I don't know what it's going to be yet. It could be OCS. Pretty likely to be OCS, to be honest. But it is also, it might be. We might decide we're doing something different so that we can do something different. So I don't know yet, but we're going to be talking about that, and that's in April, and that's a full week event too. Not quite as long as Winterfest or CS Consim World Expo. Next event after that, I believe, is Origins, which I will be taking off for at least a couple of days. I probably won't be a 5-day attendee, but I will be a 4-day attendee at Origins again this year. So that's good. Thanks everybody for the congratulations. I appreciate that. The funny thing, Kent, is the pasta water rule is an optional rule. It's not even in the core game. So anyway. So after Origins, the next event that would happen would be either Consim World Expo or WBC. And I haven't made a decision on that yet. But part of the calculus is that I have dates for WBC, and there are no dates yet for Consim World Expo. The other, another huge factor is that I don't have to fly to WBC. I can drive. It will cost me a tank of gas, which is admittedly expensive right now, both ways to get to and from WBC. Where flying out to Tempe is, I'd say generously going to cost at least $400 just for that. So, and then it's an expensive site as well. Not that it's not an expensive site at WBC, but there's other options there, and we can have conversations. John Madison asks about Origins. If Brandt is still here, he will lecture you ad nauseum about that subject. John, if you want to hit me up offline and we could talk about that. There is a Wargame presence. They were actually talking about doing a Europa game at Origins this year. If you are interested in that, let me know. So, and the thing we're talking about is actually Second Front, starting in 44. But we have not made a final decision on that yet. We just need to get the people to commit to it. That's all we need. It doesn't have to be 1 million people. Tempe happened last year, but it happened at an oddball time, and the John has had to put up with a tremendous amount of bullshit from the Dallas people. So he had to concentrate on that rather than the auctions aren't there anymore, unfortunately. I wish they were. All right. I think we're now getting into the cruise. There is plenty of wargaming at Origins. You know, if you want like the big monster game experience, then I would say you probably ought to go to a different event if that's what you really want to do. We kind of want to do it just to kind of prove a point. But Origins is not really about big monster games. Not to say that you can't get a modest monster game into Origins. You can. Mo is in the house. Thanks for stopping by, Mo. Vince Ree has emptied his bottle of Lafroig. Lafroig is one of my favorites. It's so good. I love it. I like it better than Ardbeg, to be honest, as a distillery. So we will be, and this is all on the calendar that is linked in the video description, the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. There'll be a couple of talk shows. There'll be some interviews done by various people, including Mo and myself and some other people. I will also be doing an OCS boot camp video, so do that as well. Thomas Bandy, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I would always check out the Europa Fest room at Origins just because it was cool to see, right? You know, I'm as critical of Europa as anybody, I think. But it's still, there are reasons why it remains a compelling experience to me personally, even if the game system itself, in any objective sense, has shitloads of problems. Perfidious Albion is doing Bailey's on ice. Which, hey, that's a relaxing beverage. 9 shows. Holy cow, okay. That's a lot. Check out the calendar. We're not going to repeat the whole calendar here. So, now the other thing, another factor choosing between WBC, because I really can't take them both. I just can't take the extra time off. Between WBC and Tempe is I can day trip WBC, right? I can't day trip Tempe. Would be a waste of everybody's time. It'd be like $1,000 trip to go out for an afternoon. Hi John, how's it going? Blah 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 blah. Walk around, take some pictures, and then go home. That would suck. And we won't be doing that. So now on the other hand, if I were to drive 3 hours out to WBC, walk around, take some pictures, say hello to people, and that kind of thing, I wouldn't really feel particularly bad about that. I could live with that. But I'm not spending $500 and being super uncomfortable for 10 hours on an airplane either. So we could do a live show from WBC. So I have the laptop now from which I can do live content. Jeff Beeler, Balkan Front Plan Y, the Italian invasion of Yugoslavia. Yeah, I think that Balkan Front is a nice little game, actually. I think the problem occurs when you get into the bigger games or the integrated games that aren't the East Front. I think it starts to work less well and feel a little less compelling. I anticipate that Tempe will be happening in August. That's our best. There's no announcement. That's not official, but that's the best guess right now. I can't take that time. So there's another thing that I can't talk about right now that we'll talk about, in a couple of months. That is a plan that will eat some of the vacation time. But I can't spare the time to go to both events. So that's the problem. Yeah, WBC is only about 3 hours from here. It's in western Pennsylvania. Not extreme western Pennsylvania, but western Pennsylvania. I've managed to grab a copy of... Okay, so I have a sort of a two-tiered want list for Wargames. Okay, one of which is like, I want this stuff. There's very little on that list at this point. There's another list of sort of targets of opportunity type of stuff where it's like, hey, if I see this for the right price, I will grab it. This was one of those. This was kind of came with Winter War, so it's like, well, hell, I was curious to at least take a look at it. I might as well dibs in on that as well. So Graffiti's Albion says the designer for the Next War system is not necessarily opposed to designing a game for Russia invading Ukraine. I thought there was a Next War Ukraine in the pipeline, actually. I mean, if I was going to Tempe, you could count on me to not leave the hotel in any meaningful way. So, John, let me ask you this question about the Second World War series. Does the Barbarossa game, or the Barbarossa game, as they call it, does that cover the entire East Front for the entire war, or does it only cover the first year, like Fire in the East did? I don't know if there needs to be a Volume 2. Maybe there doesn't. So there's PressCon is in North Carolina or Virginia or someplace like that. That's drivable. I mean, Maryland is drivable. We can get to Winter Offensive in about 6 or 7 hours. The worry about that, of course, is it's January, right? So, are we going to get totally hosed by inclement weather if we commit to going to Winter Offensive? That is possible. I got Winter War off of Pay It Forward, off one of the Pay It Forward Facebook groups. So it is not an offer that is still around. PressCon is in Charlottesville, Virginia, over President's Day weekend, as Brant informs us. It's supposed to be a good event, but it's not a wargaming event. I'd probably... So, I mean, we all have to make decisions about what events we are going to go to based on proximity and cost and all the other variables, right? Okay, so there is a Volume 2 that you need. And does Volume 2 cover the entire rest of the war, or is there a Volume 3 that you need after that? Because Scorched Earth only covers the war up to sometime in 44. Is why I ask. Oh, okay. So Barbarossa covers until 43. That's actually good. Well, I mean, either way, okay. So in principle, it's fine, but those games are also really expensive. And if you needed to buy 2 of them to do the entire East Front, then that might be an issue. So, another thing you got to be concerned about is And by the way, it did snow on my way home from Compass Expo again this year. It wasn't as bad. And we flew, so the drive was like home from the airport, so that was okay. Daniel Berger says that PresCon has a Bitterwoods tournament. So Compass Expo has a Bitterwoods tournament as well. And I think that WBC has a Bitterwoods tournament as well. It's a very tournament-y game. All right, where are we at here? Tons of French guys. I forget what the prices are. And of course, you can kind of modularize those prices if you want to print them yourself, the counters yourself and maps yourself. That sounds like a pain in the ass. Okay, so Thomas Bandy mentions that ASL Starter Kits 2 and 3 should be reprinted soonish. I can also report word from Multiman that Race for Bastogne should be out. Should be shipping or start shipping by the end of the year. So there's that. So I know I said I wasn't going to pre-order for Multiman. I never said I wasn't going to order for a Multiman. I only said I wasn't going to pre-order. So I've now, now that I've cooled off about that situation, we now have another pre-order in for Race for Bastogne. So I definitely want it. Very excited to get a new GTS game. Johnny Walker Green. Johnny Walker Green probably is a little mid. I've never had the green, actually. I would... So, if by medicinal you mean that sort of iodine-y taste, that is a characteristic of a peated whiskey. Johnny Walker Green is peated, not particularly heavily, but it is peated. Black and double black are both more peated, and I like that flavor, but not everybody does. If you just don't want that flavor, do Macallan or do Glenfarclas or something like that. Or try at the opposite extreme, try Highland Park, which is both peated and sherried for a really interesting combination. Wargames for trial events. Okay, so I'd be curious to know that. I like the double black as well. So well, I could tell you that if the hypothetical Italian invasion of Yugoslavia would be it's going to be pretty difficult for the Italians. I do think it would be interesting to play. It also wouldn't take a million years to play. You could play all of, if we were just doing Balkan Front and didn't have to worry about all the extra cruft that Wavell's War was piling on top of us, we could get Baltic Front done in a month. No problem. Meet once a week. Huh? Vis Nunya says MMP is closing up shop in the new year. I'd love to know your source for that information. I do not have any information suggesting that. I have not. So I do have a little bit of additional. This is not really news because it's rumor, right? Okay. So word out of Christopher Dean's, I don't know if it's the son, the brother, I don't know what the story is, said that they found a number of packages that had mailing labels that were in his car, and he mailed those. Now, I can verify personally that I do not have anything on the way from Naples, Florida. So I do not wish to be perceived as grave stomping here. But it is incredibly on-brand for NWS to have packages packaged, labeled, labels paid for, ready to go, sitting in a car unshipped from mid-November. That is absolutely believable. My recommendation for people with money tied up in NWS orders remains the same today as it did before, which is to show empathy, use patience, but if you have decided that you are not getting an answer, and I sent the emails and I sent messages to the Facebook page and I didn't get any answers, I went through my credit card company and got my money back. I already got my money back. So I already ordered the game from Multiman. So NWS will go to probate, but your credit card company will give you your money back. So if you've decided that you have waited long enough, or if your your total investment is just too high that you're not comfortable waiting, then go through your credit card company, go through PayPal or whoever you paid through, and you'll probably get your money back. So anyway, stuff on my want list. There's very little on that want list. There's like the priority items. Honestly, there's only really 2 left. There's 4 left. There's maybe 6. There is a list, but there's the remaining Europa pieces that I don't have. Now the important ones there are Scorched Earth and Second Front, both of which go for stupid amounts of money. I also don't have Their Finest Hour, and I don't have Fall of France. Hilariously, I have Inside the Box videos coming on both of those from Fucko. So I got at least to see what those look like inside. The other 2 are None But Heroes and River of Death. Now, River of Death may get reprinted by GMT. I haven't heard any official word about that. I'm happy to wait, but I haven't heard any official word about that unless Stigler's got news for us. I may not, might not be willing to wait forever. None But Heroes, I imagine, will not be reprinted, and that's disappointing. It is a really good game. I had a bid on it on eBay, and it just went higher than I was willing to go. Bis Nunya, that must be NWS that you're talking about. So and if there's a clean will, then the probate process should be clean in principle. That depends, though. It can get really complicated if somebody's got a lot of debts or something like that. I don't know what his situation was, so. I think we are closing in on being done with clipping French for the evening, I think. I'm a little bit tired of looking at these at some point. So if anybody's got a copy of None But Heroes that they want to get rid of for a non-ruinous price, let me know. I thought somebody actually reached out to me with an offer for it, and I lost track of that. I have no idea what happened with that. Ardwulf's Lair at gmail.com. Robert Martin, was that the Fresno Games Association, the terrible publisher that got started by the 2 guys from GMT? There was talk about them on Facebook earlier today. I know. I guess I'll do my media plug very quickly. I think I don't have anything more to say about Wheel of Time right now. I'd like to see a couple more episodes, and there's only 2 more episodes. However, the new season of The Expanse has started, and I watched the first episode of that, and it's like just setting it up for the season. But man, it's really good. It's really good. So. Not everybody has the financial wherewithal to just relocate wherever they want. A lot of people are trapped in place. So, I have played... Oh, God, it's been many months. Probably about 2 months since I've played a video game. I think the last thing I played was New World, which I was enjoying, and I don't know. I had to take the time off for Origins, and I missed it, and I stayed away from it long enough where it broke my focus on it, and I have put a total of maybe 2 or 4 hours into it since then. That Barbarians is pretty neat. Is that the show where the Romans speak Latin and the Barbarians speak German, even though they weren't Germans? So, man, there's tons of work. Sheriff Harry, where are you in Canada? Not that there's not remote parts of Canada, Lord knows, but up in Calgary, they got a great game store in Calgary. If Mike, send me an email and let me know on that Fall of France. I'm probably willing to throw some money at that, depending on condition and what you want for it and all that jazz. So, I don't hate the Wheel of Time so far. But I want to let the series finish. Right now, there's so word is that the show was originally supposed to get a 10 episode first season, and they had to cut it to 8 due to the pandemic. Maybe that's true, and maybe that's why it feels pretty rushed. It's still getting more right than it is getting wrong, I think, but it does feel really rushed, and some of the cuts, the things that aren't necessarily cut, but would have appeared by now if it was following the book a little more closely, are a bit baffling. There's still time for them to bring some of that stuff in. So, Mo, you're probably going to be very pleased by Game of Thrones up to the end of season 5 or 6. Let me put it that way. At the last 2 seasons, you can really tell that everybody involved in that wanted it to be over, and they got super lazy and sloppy with everything, including leaving Starbucks cups on the sets while they were filming, that they had to take out digitally afterwards, and just completely rushing the story, and it totally didn't work. So Valley de Cour is one that Dan has mentioned repeatedly. That is supposed to be pretty good, as is the Sentry Box, which is the place in Canada that I was thinking of. In Calgary that I was thinking of. I mean, it is in Canada too. I wouldn't say skip the second half. I'd say watch it up to interesting. Okay. Oh geez. We got free French leaders in. Well, we're going to have a problem with this. Well, let's put these in here. It's huge numbers of half squads. I may have to break the free French out into their own tray, is what this might end up looking like. I mean, I'd be pretty okay with that. But I'm not set up to do it right this minute. That's the problem. I am going to have to do that. Oops. Oh well, it's fine. It's fine. I can have 4 trays for the French, right? Right at the end, Battle at the Bay. If that's the battle up north, that was really cool. The battle at Winterfell is hot garbage, however. I mean, Alan, the answer to that question is going to depend on who you ask. If you ask me that, I might give you a different answer depending on what day you ask the question. I mean, there are times where I feel like OCS is the perfect balance between complexity, sort of puzzleability, realism, and all that. And there are times where I grow dissatisfied with it for one of a variety of reasons, including, hey, the turns are 3 days. How come I'm trapped in March mode? Does that make sense? I'm not sure that it does. But these are concessions that, you make. You got to make some kind of concessions in every single game. That's not, I think the lesson of OCS is not that. So there is Stack Academy. Who did I talk to that was going to go to Stack Academy? Pete Bartlett from Multiman was going to go to Stack Academy, and that's in Montreal. Brant, is that on the calendar? Make sure Stack Academy's on the calendar. Robert Martin, thanks for stopping by. I mean, for a lot of people, I know that the Mark Simnich operational games hit a nice balance between detail and complexity. They have a pretty basic core. They have a layer of chrome on top of that. That depends exactly what the chrome looks like, depends on the game. And then you end up with pretty reasonable results. I've played several of them. I've had fun with all of them. See, the funny thing about OCS is if you talk to... Dean wrote an article about, like, here are the signature features of the games I have designed. I forget where that article appeared. I want to say it was in Special Ops. And the thing that he talked about with OCS was not the supply system. It was surprise. Because surprise makes combat fundamentally unpredictable. And I really like that, too. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. I mean, the Battle for Normandy, for example, mixes bad results in with the good results, right? So I'm not going to do GCACW boot camp because that same weekend is Winter Offensive, and the GCACW people will all be at that, playing GCACW. So... there is a military museum in Groveport, Ohio, by the way, which I should probably check out at some point. I know they have a Paul Tibbets exhibit. Otherwise, I don't know. That's a lot of... oh, here we are with the French jokes again. So, John doesn't like the OCS initiative mechanic. There are ways around that, and actually there's been a couple of games that have addressed... a couple OCS games that address that. Blitzkrieg Legend, for example, the Germans win ties. That's not the case with any other one. I think there's one other OCS game, an early-ish one, might have been Hub's Pocket, or Hubus Pocket, that if you are... and I might be conflating this with something else, where if you have initiative, you get a +1 to your roll. So that it tends to be a little less swinging. I don't really have a problem with the OCS initiative mechanic. It doesn't make sense, but it works in the context of you really can't optimize a double turn unless you set yourself up to run a double turn. There's a huge GCACW presence at Winter Offensive, so be aware of that. A lot of it's ASL. There's a huger ASL presence there, but there's a lot of GCACW, and you can do tournaments. You can just hop in. They have stuff for everybody. So Bis Nunya, asks about BCS, and this is a great question because BCS is, I mean, the fact that I've just clipped all 4 games again is part of the reason for that. Is I'm very intrigued by BCS right now. There's a certain component of Dean's designs that I think people would describe as fiddly, and that's certainly true of, it's not really true of SCS, but it's certainly true of OCS. Where there's a lot of like little fiddly little rules that you can get hung up on. And BCS is not immune to that. But BCS also really elegantly addresses some of the same questions that OCS addresses without the necessity of tracking supply points on the map. And I'm particularly talking about the combination of the way supply trace works, the way the baggage trains work, and the way the snafu table reflects all that. It also adequately represents like command paralysis or command efficiency on the other side of it. If you want to see BCS played in a campaign context, check out the Tabletop's Edge channel, which I want to say I had him as channel of the week sometime, like quite a while ago. And he's doing a whole series of Last Blitzkrieg playthrough videos. I have some playthrough video of Brazen Chariots on the channel, and I've also played some Baptism by Fire. And I think my hang up on that is in part because there were some things about some of the aspects of the rules that I think we were getting wrong. There are also some things about the rules that I found a little bit unsatisfying, some of which has been addressed at this point. But a big part of it is just the fact that they're operational War in the Desert games, and I'm not that into that. I'm not Mr. Bulge either, but the Bulge it was more interesting, I think, that for me than the situation in Baptism by Fire, certainly. He's also got a ton of good whiff videos too, so check him out for that. Now the surprise. So I mean, when I first started playing OCS, you'd look at the surprise rule, and you think, I thought this is bullshit. How can this work? But it totally works. It totally works at the end of the day. It has exactly the effect that you'd hope that it would have. And it's all, John Madison, thanks for stopping by. It's all driven by action rating. The impact of action rating on its surprise roll is huge. And if you have like a significant action rating differential, you're at a tremendous advantage on that surprise roll. Like if you're at a +2, especially if it's an overrun, if you're at a +2, do it. This is why you overrun a lot with the Germans, and you don't overrun very much as the Soviets in many OCS games. Yeah, and I don't know enough about Crusader. That's the problem. Maybe it's very plausible that it's more exciting than I think it is. But what I think I would prefer to do from a BCS standpoint is to play BCS in a theater that's of more interest to me, and then once I'm familiar and comfortable with the system, then I can go and check out the Crusader game. Brazen Chariots is, there's a lot to like there. Jacob Guernsey, thanks for stopping by. SCS games are good for beginners. OCS, not so much. But that's not to say, I know people who have started wargaming with OCS, right? I mean, your interest level in the topic and in the thing that you're doing, and maybe in the people that you're doing it with, is more important than the complexity of the game, strictly speaking. Is it a more complicated game, harder to teach? Sure, but, people are willing to deal with that. There's plenty of people whose first and only war game is ASL. What does it say about the ASL, right? Well, ASL must be super easy then, right? Obviously not. So, and I'm not even talking about starter kit. I'm talking about full ASL. Lewis Goldberg, thanks for stopping by. Rostov 41 looks good. North Africa, like I said, I filmed the unboxing today. There'll be an unboxing of North Africa. So it's a Dean Essig design, and he has got an interesting looking activation mechanic in there, and I'm curious to see how that works. Otherwise, I'm really covered on North Africa games, right? I've got the 2 operational games, Brazen Chariots and Baptism by Fire. Baptism by Fire is not Western Desert, but still. I've got War in the Desert, which we're literally playing now. I've got DAC. I've got Desert Fox Deluxe. So I don't really have a place for North Africa, to be honest. Gen Chaos 33 asks if Time for Trumpets is worth the effort. He's learning it, or he or she is learning it, but cannot find another vassal live newbie to learn with. Too big for solo. I mean, it's got... I will be honest. I think if you're trying to learn Time for Trumpets out of Time for Trumpets, I think that's a pretty difficult task. It's not designed to be learned from the contents of the box. That's a bizarre design decision that is sometimes nevertheless made. I think it's designed for people who are already familiar with Bitter Woods. If you are already familiar with Bitter Woods, I am told you will pick up Time for Trumpets very quickly. If you are not familiar with Bitter Woods, and I've never played Bitter Woods, I found a lot of head scratching was occurring in my perusal of the Time for Trumpets material. If you are interested in the Bulge topic, it may be that you will find that Time for Trumpets ends up being your definitive Bulge game. I think that's completely believable. But it's certainly, again, based on the contents of the box and aside from your familiarity with the predecessor game, something like Ardennes 44 is way more approachable. And it's half as big. Less than half as big, actually. So... the best, I said this when we talked about learning games, the best learning game, the best newbie war game is the war game that your buddy already knows how to play and is willing to teach you and that you're interested in. Those are more important factors than how complicated the game is. I think there's issues with Iron Curtain. Issues with the supply mechanics or lack thereof, and issues with the victory conditions. I think those are surmountable problems, and if you are looking to Iron Curtain as sort of a sandbox World War III thing, I still think it's worthwhile. But the supply issues and the victory condition problems are reasons why I did not hang on to the game. So, Perfidious Albion says that wargamers in the 80s and early 90s were more tolerant, I think is what he's trying to say, for complicated rulebooks. Quite a few of the SPI games' rule sets were monstrously complex. Is that really true? I think that is an oft-repeated sentiment that I'm not sure, with a couple of exceptions, like Campaign for North Africa. I'm not sure, and maybe the next war. I'm not sure it's actually true. One of the examples that I like to cite, and I've cited it more than once, is Third Reich, the original Third Reich. That was considered the apex of complexity at the time. Now, it came out in 1974, so not 80s exactly. But even in the 80s, when I started playing, more or less, it was considered a ferociously complex game. And now I think if you look at that game, I think it doesn't look particularly complicated. I mean, it's not simple. But I think if it was a 10 before, and it was, I think it was, I think it's like a 6 or 7. I think it's like a 7 now, right? So I'm not convinced that wargamers had more propensity to complex rule sets 20 years or 30 years ago than they do now. There's a lot of really complicated rule sets floating around. There's, you have your ASL. OCS is not a simple game. You have your ASL, you have your GOS, you have your Fighting Wings, which was mentioned as a super complicated game. Well, that's why that's why they rewrote it 5 times. So I think Brant might be onto something there. There was a pool of games that were released in, say, 1980 was so much smaller. I mean, I was talking about war games, right? Even if we're just talking about like hex and counter war games, the pool of war games that was released in like 1980, and it was a lot, right? It pales in comparison to what we see now. And we have a lot of other things that are crossing over into the wargame space, like like Levy and Campaign and Coin and Twilight Struggle and Combat Commander and all these other things. So I think Flat Top is complex, but not difficult. I don't think Flat Top is difficult. I think it is complex, but it was also another one of those games that Avalon Hill considered very complex. Are we talking about cheating people? I don't play with cheating people. I just don't play with them. I ghost them and don't talk to them anymore. I don't need to deal with that. ASL core rule set was 84. That doesn't sound right, but I'm unwilling to say that you're wrong. 85 is what BGG says. I trust you more than I trust BGG, though, so if that's the right neighborhood. Fast Times mentions TSR's Lima Bayonets. I mean, I don't think that's particularly complicated in, nowadays either. That's a simpler game than the current GBACW rule set, I think. I have Lima Bayonets. It's classic GBACW. And by classic, I mean SPI GBACW. Another thing, though, is there is like a greater experience pool in the hobby among the hobbyists that say, "Hey, we're super familiar with this spread of mechanics. We have another game that comes out that's complicated, but it uses all tried and true mechanics, so people find it very familiar and learn it very easily." Gleam Bayonets is one I'd like to play. That's a really interesting battle. Lynn Pratt says ASL was released Christmas '85. So that would have been, I was in high school, like a sophomore in high school. That sounds right. Maybe freshman. And it was released while I was in high school. I know that. Let me put it that way. I thought it was a little later than that, but I might be thinking of something else that released around the same time. Devar 101 says, complex in the past because internet was not around. So that's an interesting and I think very salient point. So let's say that you got a copy of Fortress Europa from Avalon Hill back in 1983. And you had, you got it, you opened it up, you punched it, and you're ready to go, and you got some questions about the rules. Well, you send Avalon Hill a self-addressed stamped friggin' envelope, and then wait for however long that took to get back to you. Now you can hop on the internet and get those answers relatively easily. And in many cases, if you go to the same place, like BGG or Constant World Threat or whatever, you'll find that a lot of people have the same questions. So that is an additional tool that people have to learn rules with now that you didn't have in 1980. Also, YouTube. There's people, I pretty much learned how to play the Battle for Normandy by watching Counterattack's videos on the Battle for Normandy. Was there things he left out? Things that I had to read? Yeah, but, I got a big head start by watching his videos. So Doug says that the core of ASL isn't especially complex. I think that's true, and that is why ASL Starter Kit is such a great was such a great move. They just distilled everything down. They just left out all the extra complications. With a few rules were left out, but mostly what they left out was just like the weird terrain types and stuff like that. If you boil it down in that way, it's pretty manageable. Also, they left out the vehicles and that helps too, and that's where a lot of the complexity comes from. I don't, as an ASL fan, I do not dispute what Stigler is saying here. The big problem with ASL is it's a bunch of Chrome looking for a system to belong to. There is, I think, some truth to that in the sense that there's a lot of slapdash rules, mechanisms in ASL for various things. Some of those don't come up very often, though. So, I mean, how often do the Caves rules come up? The Caves rules are rules that people hate. Doesn't come up very often. Airdrops doesn't come up very often. Amphibious landings doesn't come up very often. Rube Goldberg machine, yes, I would agree with that characterization. Greg Grant says that Operation Dauntless has some mechanics that are overly complex without adding enjoyability to play. Now, as I recall, that uses the Red Winter system, and that's a pretty highly regarded game. I have not really looked at either of those seriously, so I can't really comment on that. I found Line of Battle pretty easy to play. The line of sight rules are kind of fiddly, but you're also kind of encouraged by Dean to hand wave at it too. And if you do that, then you tremendously lower the rules overhead. Findle70, thanks for stopping by. Yes, there are bicycles. There are bicycles, and there are prisoners, and there are all kinds of stuff. So, Daniel Berger mentioned Starfleet Battles, which is another example, much like ASL. Although I think the complexity floor in Starfleet Battles is a little higher than it is in ASL. It's the same type of situation where there's a shitload of rules, but you don't have to learn all the weird weapon types and stuff like that. If you're just playing, Constitution class versus D7, there's remarkably little you really need to know. So, but you do need to know, like, the power allocation stuff, which is like the absolute core of that game, and that's somewhat complicated. So, I would be really curious to see how a game like Streets of Stalingrad handles sewer combat as opposed to ASL, actually. I've never done that in any game that's not ASL, so I'd be curious to see what alternative approaches to the fighting in the sewers topics are available. Good point, Alan. Good point. SPI's Air War. SPI had a number of quite complicated games. In addition to Air War was pretty complicated. Sniper... Was it Sniper? No. It was... Firefight was pretty complicated. The Next War was pretty complicated. Obviously, Campaign for North Africa. I don't think that... I mean, by the standards of the day, I think Atlantic Wall was fairly complicated. But from like 1978, I think it was. No, I don't think particularly the tolerance for complicated games was higher. I think it's higher now than it was then. I have not looked at the reissues of Starfire, so I don't know where that system is at nowadays. I know it's still around. Somebody's doing it. So, Perfidious Albion says that at the scale of Streets of Stalingrad, sewers are not really a factor. So, that makes sense, actually. That is really kind of a squad-level thing. City fight, that might be what I'm thinking of instead of firefight, actually. Also, think about a game like Empire of the Sun. How complicated is Empire of the Sun? This is true of OCS too, but I think it's more obvious in Empire of the Sun. I don't think the rules are all that complicated. Also a little fiddly, by the way, but not really all that complicated. But man, playing that game effectively there's a big learning curve to play that thing effectively. And that's definitely true of OCS as well, where the rules are complicated, but not that complicated. But actually making them work for you is there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of levers to fool with. So I have committed to doing OCS at Winterfest. Now, as I've mentioned before, I always feel like I don't want to do OCS at Winterfest because we play a lot of OCS lately, but at the same time we haven't been playing. Haven't played in like 3 months. So we just started again, but like I said, we're gonna be we're gonna play. We played last week. We'll play this week. We're playing Blitzkrieg Legend, and then we will not play again for at least a few weeks. So, and I don't want to like lose my chops playing OCS. Not that I'm like super awesome or anything, but I was getting to the point where I wasn't a complete stooge, and then I didn't play for several months. So, and that's not cool. So we're gonna do some pretty intensive OCS warm up stuff in the couple of months we have between now and then. And then we will be playing OCS Forgotten Battles. So for those who don't know, OCS Forgotten Battles is the next game that Tony Burkett is working on. It is a standalone game, but you can play it alongside Third Winter, and it is just as Third Winter is a 4-map game in the Ukraine. Forgotten Battles is another 4-map section immediately to the north of Third Winter. In the same time period, September, I think, to April or March. September 43 to March of 44. So I haven't played it yet. I am very much looking forward to it. A lot of the infrastructure laid in Third Winter will still be applicable to Forgotten Battles. So I'm actually super excited about it at this point. I'm so excited about it that I'm taking Russian lessons on Duolingo, which will probably go nowhere if my Duolingo history is any indication. So we have about 20 more minutes. We will go about another 20 more minutes. And I think we're good here. That is a good amount left. I got to figure this mess out. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it yet. We'll figure it out. I feel like there's 2 different shades of blue, but they're so close. I even shined a little light on them to see if I could tell them apart, and I can't tell them apart. And I got pretty close to perfect color vision. Both future games. Don't you mean all 3 future games, Chad? All 3. So there's Forgotten Battles, which is what I just said. There's Hero City, which is the same thing, except another 4 maps north of Forgotten Battles. That's probably the other one you're thinking of, and that's the Leningrad front. Well, it's not the Leningrad front, but it's the Leningrad front, you know what I mean? And then there's a Crimea game that will be a standalone, but will tack on to the bottom and dangle off the bottom of Third Winter. So you'll be able to play Crimea as well. Wednesday topic, I don't know yet. Usually the Wednesday topic is something we make up on the spot 5 minutes before the show. I will tell you what the topic next week here at the Counterclipping stream was. And I meant to do this early in the show, and I did not. The Cyrillic alphabet's actually fairly easy. There's a bunch of letters that look the same as English letters, but then are different, have different phonetic values, and that can create confusion. But that's not that complicated. It gets to be the grammar. But topic next week is Traveler. So if you are looking for RPG stuff, then tune in next week for Traveler. We're going to focus on, I'm sure we'll talk Wargames too, because there's some crossover there, but we will be talking about Traveler next week. So And, you know, then I'll get to know if everybody bails on it, then I'll know not to do it again. So, but Wednesday I haven't the vaguest idea. The only thing scheduled at this exact moment is the North Africa unboxing and the Wednesday thing, but that's on Dad's channel, so I don't schedule that. There's a whole bunch of interesting things in the pipeline for BCS, by the way. The next game is Aracore. That's on pre-order now. Next game after that is it called Test of Faith? It is an Arab-Israeli war game. I gotta say, I'm not super into that topic. I'll probably pick it up, but I'm not super into that topic. OCS Stalingrad is pretty much enemy at the gates, but like Avalon Hill's Stalingrad, it is not fundamentally a game about Stalingrad. Stalingrad just happens to be an objective in the game. So, yes, you can say enemy at the gates, aka or Case Blue, is OCS Stalingrad, but calling it that is, I think, apt to give you the wrong idea about what kind of game it is. So, there's a new Traveler starter thing from, and we'll talk about all that stuff. We'll talk about Mongoose and GDW and all the other people, and that they probably gonna make Mark Miller mad when I talk about Traveler 5. So, Enemy at the Gates is one of the Enemy at the Gates is one of the old sort of no longer sort of obsolescent. Let's use that word. OCS games that there's still a decent amount of demand for because of the ludicrous prices that Case Blue goes for. There is actually a Traveler convention, and there's a Chaosium Con. The first Chaosium Con is sometime early next year in Ann Arbor. So check that out. And there's a Traveler Con, which is somewhere in Pennsylvania. John, I'll be looking for your email. What's this? Oh, dear. Thanks. Thank you, Michael. See, you pronounce people's names correctly, and good things happen. So, next MMP line of battle game, I don't have a timetable on that, but it's going to be called No Turning Back on the Battle of the Wilderness. When I see Chip, probably at Winterfest, I will be talking to him about that. I assume Chip is coming to Winterfest. So, I'll sell you my Case Blue for $600. It's missing 34 counters. No, I'm not actually doing that. So, most general... So, Doug, and we should talk about this again at some point in depth, but briefly. Most general gaming conventions are not good wargaming events anymore. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, that's true. There's some exceptions and some caveats. One of the exceptions is Buckeye Game Fest, where we still have a whole room that's just wargaming, right? Big wargaming. So, and that's great because Buckeye Game Fest supports us. If folks are interested, by the way, ardwulfslair@gmail.com. If folks are interested in coming to Buckeye Game Fest the first week of April in Columbus, Ohio, to play at Monster Games, let me know, and we will see what is actually going to be on the docket. Let me know, and if there's something specific you'd like to play or a list or whatever, send it to me. I'm looking for an inadequately priced Case Blue. Actually, I'm not really in the market for another Case Blue. If at some point, yeah, we'll play it again, and if we use my copy, I will just make replacement counters. I'm completely okay with that. Because I'm never selling it, I am okay with just making replacement counters. It's all good. John, the cool thing about using Russian and Morse code is you don't have to memorize the vowels. So, Oh, good Lord. At some point, I need to contact Organ Laminations and get a sponsorship from them, because I'm really selling them a lot of counter clippers at this point, I think. Peter Bergs, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, see, I think that's, I mean, I'm not paying $750 for that. That's just crazy talk. I mean, is it worth it? I mean, certainly if you play Case Blue once, even if you pay $800 for it, if you play Case Blue once, you're going to get your money's worth out of it. Unless you just hate it the whole time, you're going to get your money's worth out of that. So, I have my blanks go in here. So if I sell a game and there's blanks, you're probably not getting the blanks. If anybody wants to whine about that, I mean, to some extent I won't blame them. But if it's a punched game anyway, then you presumably don't care that you don't have the blanks. So let me remind folks that if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe to the channel. If you haven't thumbsed up on the video, please do thumbs up on the video. Somebody mentioned to me the other day that, oh, hey, I just figured out how to do that on my television. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that on the television, to be completely honest. So, I mean, that's not that straightforward necessarily. Of course, I'm not really a television guy either, so one of the ramifications of the employment shift, we'll call it a shift and not a change, because I'm going to be doing the same thing in January that I am now, is that I have some use it or lose it PTO time. So I'm going to be taking a week off around Christmas, before and after Christmas. So I'm going to have a few days off, and it is my absolute intention to sleep until noon those days, but I also want to get the sale video done. So I mean, if you're not going to get hung up on exact unit designations, you might be able to get away with playing Case Blue without the 34 counters, but I am not doing that. I've played Reds. It's pretty good. Ted Racer design on the Russian Civil War. It's a good hex encounter, a good, relatively simple hex encounter treatment of the Russian Civil War. I hope nobody lost the sound. Sound's coming in on my side. It might just be you. If anybody else is having that problem, please let me know. So, I mean, I think the original purpose of the corner rounders was supposed to be like for business cards and stuff. But I also know that they've sold a lot of them to like Organ Lamination specifically, I know has sold a lot of them to wargamers, to the point where the reason they brought out the deluxe, meaning the reason they started importing the deluxe model from China, was because it was supposed to be a better model for wargamers. Is it? Debatable. I have, hold on. Guess what showed up? My 2.5mm clipper from the TSA sent it back. It came back. It works fine. It's not noticeably beat up or anything like that. It is completely fine. It does look like it got some moisture at it, but I'm not sure how that happened. Both of these look like they're showing a little bit of rust in here. I might just take a little wire brush to that. So, Andrew Atkin, any recommendations on a mid to high complexity Russian Civil War game? Okay, so there's not a lot in that space. So two angles to think about. There's not that many games on the Russian Civil War. Also, do you mean the Russian Revolution or the Russian Civil War? a lot of folks haven't adequately thought about the difference between the two. There really is not much on the Russian Revolution. There are about 10 games or so on the Russian Civil War, of which I own all but 2. The 2 that I don't have are the revision of Russian Civil War from SPI, which is very similar to the old SPI game, which is a good game, but it's a multiplayer game. It's kind of hard to engineer games for that reason. What's the Russian Civil War game from Azure Wish? La Rosaya, I think, something like that. That I don't have, and that's like an operational Russian Civil War game. It looks super interesting, incredibly rare. More rare than valuable, although it's also fairly pricey. Right now, you can still get Triumph of Chaos version 2 from Clash of Arms, and it is, despite the large quantity of errata that you will have to fight through, it is considered the gold standard for Russian Civil War. It is basically the Paths of Glory system, with a significant amount of additional chrome. You will probably have to make some effort put some effort into it. But everybody I've talked to that has played it, that is interested in that topic, and I'm interested in that topic, obviously, has said it's worthwhile. So, the one, what else is around? There's a game called, there was a game in Against the Odds, which I have, which is down here on the shelf. I can't remember the name of it. For Bloody Honor. Not in the same league as that. Reds is pretty good, but I believe Reds is out of print from GMT as well right now. So right now, I would go for Triumph of Chaos version 2. That's what I would go. And it was on a table at Compass Expo. That's true, too. Now, Le Grand Guerre is supposed to be really good, but Le Grand Guerre is another Azure Wish game, very rare. I have an open eBay search for it. It's never even fired. At no point have I seen that on eBay. Every so often, like Europa Universalis or even La Révolution Française will show up, but I've never seen Le Grand Guerre show up on eBay. Which isn't to say that it doesn't. It just, I haven't seen it. I'm just curious to know what it goes for. At this point, I am pretty satisfied with my decision to go with Balance of Powers as my World War I solution at that scale. I think it does, it may be that Le Grand Guerre is brilliant and does everything better, but Balance of Powers does all those same things too. I do have Red Flag Over Paris coming at some point as soon as GMT wants to ship it to me. So, that is Red Flag Over Paris. If you're going to order it from GMT, order it now, you might still be able to get the P500 price. But it's shipping now. So, I've got Le Grand Guerre on my list too, and I'm not very serious about it. But yeah, not very serious about it. Just because I don't think it's ever going to come up at a price I want to pay. It's not that I wouldn't. I will tell you this: there is a vassal module for it. And so you can open it up and look at the map and the pieces and all that, and you can get the rules online as well. So you can have a look, you can evaluate it without running down a copy of Le Grand Guerre. I guess you're out of luck on the P500 price, but it's even at MSRP. It's not that expensive. Fatal Alliances is another one that's been recommended to me, and I like Whiff a lot, so it's kind of a natural fit. And I've just never really, I just didn't really feel it. I just wasn't feeling it for some reason. So, okay, so we are about out of time here, but I have another swallow or so left. So, Next week, topic Traveler. This Thursday, there will be the unboxing of SCS in North Africa, and there might be a Friday Inside the Box video of some Europa thing, too. I don't know. And on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or on Eastern Standard Time again, we will be streaming with Dan on a random topic that we will immediately abandon and talk about colonoscopies and hookers. So bear that all in mind. And tune in, and it's a very dynamic show, let me tell you. If you want to hear like a show where the person does preparation and has an outline and has expert witnesses and stuff, that is not that show, okay? We are not doing that on Wednesdays. So bear that in mind. All right, so I would like to thank everybody for stopping by. We had a maximum of 129, which is really good. So I'd like to thank everybody for stopping by. Again, Traveler next week. So if you want to, I mean, there will definitely be all the usual rambling as well. And of course, you know, it's published by a Wargame publisher. So we'll talk about Wargames too. But I'm going to talk more along the lines of Traveler. So tune in for that. We'll see how that show goes. It is kind of an experiment. The whites definitely have a hard time winning reds, I will tell you that. But I think that's historically reasonable too. So I would like to thank everybody for stopping by. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in the chat. Please do subscribe to the channel. Please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the links in the video description to the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, and the merch store. I got new t-shirts, but they have to go through the wash before I can wear them because they smell like new t-shirts, and it's very off-putting. So do